Welcome to Adulting Decrypted. We are your hosts.
I'm Gene, and I'm starting my first year of college.
I'm Ashton. I'm a music performer, composer, and educator.
I'm Gideon, a high school senior.
I'm Roscoe, the dad. Those are my three sons, and this is Adulting Decrypted, where we discuss ways to become adults and the things we need to know to be successful at life. Welcome to Adulting Decrypted. I just want to point out, guys, that I believe that every problem has a solution. With that being said, just want you to think, is there a problem that you have encountered recently that you have not been able to solve?
Is this rhetorical, or are we
No,
answering?
That's something to think about. Deep thoughts could be rhetorical.
I want to throw 200 feet in discus. That's a problem I have.
Okay. So there's the problem is that you currently throw how far?
Meet PR is 117.
There you go. Every problem has a solution. The trick is some take longer to solve than others. So right now, Gideon, that problem's pretty big. That's a pretty big gap. 117 to 200 is a pretty big distance to cover and a pretty big group to overcome. So as we talk through this tonight, that will help you think through this. I've identified 5 key areas, trying to keep it small and organized, of how to solve a problem. They're identifying and understanding the problem, research the systems and practices behind the problem, visualize the problem, brainstorm multiple solutions, and then identify the most suitable solution to what you're faced with. Albert Einstein's quoted as saying, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about the solution. So I think the first part of solving any problem is really coming down and deciding what is the real problem. Gideon, if you're to think on your problem, and not being able to throw that far, what do you think the root cause of that what do you think their base cause is?
My form?
Yeah, it could be. I don't know. What about experience?
Yeah.
How long have you been throwing a disc?
A month.
Yeah. So there might be some timing issues there. I think on this one we're good enough. You understand the problem. But this is where you ask multiple questions. Okay, is that really the problem? And some problems are pretty quick. What I was thinking today is one of them today that I encountered that was a pretty quick solve. Was I got on I-15 going up to the office, and sure enough, brake lights everywhere. So at that point in time, I understood the problem. I'm not going to make it to work on time. There's no reason to really ask multiple questions. It comes down to, how's my quickest way to figure this out? I've found Google Maps to be a pretty reliable source. Bust it open. It says, hey, it's going to be 25 minutes on the freeway or like 12 on these back roads. Cool. Bailed out of the freeway. I did my research, which is step number 2. Research is the one where you can spend a lot of time. This is where RCA happens. I don't know. Have you guys heard of root cause analysis?
I think so.
There's times when a root cause seems pretty basic, but then as we dive deeper, we find out there's bigger concerns. For example, a great one for this for me was weight loss. I look at a problem and I go, oh, it's easy. I eat too many calories. Okay, cool. That's an easy solution. But what's the root cause of that? Well, am I eating the right food in the morning? Am I eating the right types of food? Am I filling it up with ice cream? What am I doing? Where's my real root cause? And the more I'm figuring it out, when I get really stressed, I tend to eat more salty food and unhealthy food. And then I find myself being really hungry. So what's my root cause? Well, it's trying to figure out the stress behind that. Because my problem still is that I eat too much food or I weigh too much. And so I'm going, okay, where's my root cause? I'm asking all these right questions.
The biggest thing that I spend most of my time problem solving with is teaching. Because when you're teaching, you're just trying to problem solve how to improve a student's ability, vocabulary, all of that sort of stuff. And it's actually been really interesting to do more teaching, because the more I do it, the more I realize, one, I rarely should ever say the same thing twice to a student unless they didn't hear me clearly the first time. So I can tell them to move their hand a certain way, or actually I'll say this, I can tell them to play quiet or play loud. And if I say play quiet and they're like, okay, yeah, was that better? And it wasn't better, it doesn't help me to say play quiet again. It might. I can say play quieter, and that kind of helps. I'm not saying the same thing. But then, so that the problem is they're not playing quiet enough. And so for me, the root cause analysis is I start to look at their hands. And I start to say, hey, okay, so I want you to play quieter, but now I can look at your hands and identify why you're not playing quieter, for example. And so, like, as I've been teaching, and I'm starting to try and figure out how to apply that to myself personally, but like, as far as life habits and sort of things, but with the root cause analysis, I find it helps to target from many different angles, rather than just saying, hey, fix that, fix that, fix that. Kind of say, okay, we could fix that. What are other things that could be fixable? We do that in creative design as well. It's like, okay, well, we want to get this story across. This is the first idea we had. Let's pretend that idea doesn't exist. What else could we do? And then through all those different options, you start to get a clearer picture of the true root of a situation.
Yeah, that's interesting, Ashton, because brainstorming a solution, right, is down there as well. I like that in your root cause, you're still trying to dig deep and go, okay, well what's some other solutions? Because that's going to help me get to the root cause. You know, especially in a teaching environment where you're troubleshooting as well as trying to figure out that root cause, because you're like, okay, did I not communicate clearly? Could be the root cause, but maybe I haven't showed them a technique. Oh, what if I tried this? Nope, that's not the root cause. Let me keep digging. Right, to where you really understand the problem of where the gap is, right, between what you're hoping for and what they're giving. And I think that even rolls back up to number one, which is identify and understand the problem. And for me, sometimes I've, like with my work and my professional and my personal life, I've had this identifying the problem and understanding the problem is taking hours and days. Where I'm walking, I'm thinking. You know, for me, it's very therapeutic to go for a walk by myself, walk in the mountains, go for a mountain bike ride, where I'm thinking because I'm pedaling uphill. And then when I go downhill, my brain just empties. It's like survival only kind of mode, you know. So it does depend on the size of the problem, what you're trying to fix, as far as identifying and the root cause. So really, really like that thought that you threw some other points in there. The other thing is trying to look at it from somebody else's view, trying to put yourself in the student's role and say, okay, how could I have done that different? Gideon, I notice you when we're at track meets, you're observing how other people are throwing, right? So you're looking at it from a different angle.
Yeah, I mean, you can learn from everybody, especially the people that are better than you. So why not try and learn?
Yeah, watch what they're doing, mimic technique.
I just spent a whole weekend doing that same thing. I was just finished an indoor drumline season with the high school that I teach, and I went with an independent group to the world championships of that activity, and I literally just spent the whole weekend watching the best of the best and was thinking, what are they doing that I'm not? What are their students capable of that mine aren't? To kind of connect the two and see how I can put all of that together.
I love that, Ashton. You bled right into number 3, which is visualize the problem, right? So now, and this doesn't work on all problems, right? Sometimes this isn't relevant, but I love that you said, I connect the dots. You know, so you're like, okay, we're you know, on the left-hand side, we might sound tingy. I don't know. I'm making stuff up, right? Sure. And on the right-hand side, you're like, they sound very crisp. You're like, okay, where are these lines and how do they connect? And how do I fix that? How do I cover that gap? And then I think some of the stuff you've done in the past has been very successful as you give them little bits of information at a time so they're ready for the next growth, they're ready for the next chapter, ready for the next solve. Gene, do you have any thoughts on visualizing or mapping out the problem?
It makes a lot of sense because if you just try to go from it in the exact same point of view every single time, you're going to continue to get the same exact result. And if that result is working, then, I mean, you don't have a problem anymore.
Oh, I love that.
But if it's still a problem, then you got to switch the way you're looking at it.
Yeah, I like that. Thank you, Gene. Yeah, the visualization really helps, I think, even on more complex problems, those ones that take months and years to fix. I was thinking of some of those problems, and those are the ones, like, for me with anger, it took me a long time to get to where little things didn't light me up like they used to. Ashton grew up with a very different dad than Gideon did, just because of my personal growth and all the time I spent connecting the dots of saying, okay, is it really Ashton that's upsetting me, or was it something at work? Is it Ashton that, or is it this action from Ashton, or is it because I'm worried about what other people see? And I had to really walk myself back and start drawing those gaps and really visualizing that. And then Gene, you and I worked on that when you were younger, on visualizing the problem and knew what was going to trigger us, and then work our way back into that. Okay, how do I not be triggered? Because it's really not, it's my problem. It's not, you guys had to deal with the consequence, but it was really my problem that I had to back off of. So I think that visualizing the problem helps, and mapping it out and designing it. Steve Jobs, as we know, was very creative oriented, very much a visual person. That's why the iPhone looks like it does and responds like it does, because it was artwork almost as much as it was functionality. To him it was. And Steve Jobs says, if you define the problem correctly, you almost have the solution. You almost have the solution. I apologize. Steve Jobs says, if you define the problem correctly, you almost have the solution, because you've spent so much time to finding the problem, understanding the problem, getting close to the problem. Ashton, this brainstorming is something that we talked on briefly, and brainstorming the solution. Gene, you mentioned earlier that if we keep doing the same thing and having the same problem, we got to adjust and recalibrate. Marshall Goldsmith wrote a whole book, and it's very interesting. It's a great read if you want it. It's upstairs. But it says, what got you here won't get you there. And I think that's what we're realizing pretty quickly with you, Gideon, with your discus throwing and some of the things you're trying to progress in. You realize that you had to change form. Gideon last week had a very successful track meet. What happened in your last track meet?
Last weekend, I jumped 21 feet 2 inches in long jump, so I qualified for state.
Woohoo!
Yay.
Way to go. It was a big deal. It was a big accomplishment. And when you jumped last year, what was your furthest that you jumped?
20 feet 2 inches.
So to go from 20 feet 2 inches to the last 6 or 7 inches it took to qualify, how hard was that?
Hello. If you're listening to this right now, that means you're currently listening to an episode of Adulting Decrypted. And let me just say thank you. My name's Ashton, one of the hosts of Adulting Decrypted, and I wanted to steal a quick second of your time to do a shameless little plug. If you've listened to our podcast for any sort of time, you know that we talk about a bunch of different stuff all about adulting. Because our goal is to help individuals in this task we call adulting. Now, we have just revamped the way that we do this. If you go to adultingdecrypted.com, you can see all of our episodes sorted out by category. We've sorted it into financial, practical, emotional, social, and things just for fun. So, if any of those categories are of particular interest to you right now, you can go onto the website, look through there, and see all of our episodes that correlate with that specific thing. This website's completely free to use. It's just another tool for our listeners to find things that are more important to them now. So, for example, if I was looking at it, I'd scroll through and say, hey, you know what? I want to see what the Adulting Decrypted crew has talked about socially. Well, one of our first episodes, season 1, episode 3, how do I talk to people? That's where we talked about all about how to talk to people. So if that's something you want right now, you can go find that right now. Also in this one, season 3, episode 15, the power of a humble mediator, where we talked to one of my old bosses about his business as a mayor, also as a small theater owner. Some really cool stuff. So, if you're looking for a better way to organize through all your self-help podcasts, try adultingdecrypted.com and enjoy the rest of the episode.
It was really hard for me. Just basically, it was really hard.
Yeah, you actually had to change form. You couldn't rely just on that natural talent. You're like, oh, I have to arch my arm. I noticed that it was throwing your arm up, and I can't describe it like you did to me.
So, for my long jump, for those who don't know, long jump is running as fast as you can and then jumping as high as you can. I can run pretty fast,
to get as far as you can, right? So it's not just high, it's how far out you go as well.
Yeah,
right?
but after you have all that speed build up, it's focusing on exactly just how high you can jump. You don't focus on length, because if you look down, then you won't jump as far. But I would run really fast. I'd come up to the board, and I would be standing pretty much straight up with a straight leg when I tried to jump, which you can't jump very high doing. So I realized that I needed to change, and right before I get to the board, I needed to lower my center of mass a little bit, so I had more power in my leg to jump off of, and that worked for me.
That's awesome. And I love that your last sentence in there said, hey, it worked for me, because a lot of times there's not one right way or wrong way to solve every problem. There's a lot of times there's multiple ways. When I look at a problem, sometimes I get pretty stuck in my ways. I'm like, guys, this is the way we're going to do it. We're going to leave the house at this time. Ashton's going to drive this car this far. Gideon's going to then drive his car. And we go through this whole big scenario. And just because that made the most sense to me doesn't make it make the most sense to Ashton or Gene or Gideon. Now, some things do have a pretty black and white answer. 2 + 2 without any other variables or convolutions behind it is 4. But then when you start using other math, I don't know, one of you guys will argue that 2 + 2 is really 5. Nope. Okay. I thought there would be. I thought
Nope.
we'd get some weird math problem there. So some things are pretty black and white. There's right and wrong. But most problems have multiple solutions. The other thing on this brainstorming, sometimes simpler is better. Do we ever start thinking of all these brainstorming ideas? And I'm probably pretty notorious for this. I come up with this elaborate plan. I'm like, yeah, look, the point is to get from point A to point B. These 5 other steps probably don't matter. Can you think of any times that you've overcomplicated a plan? Or others have complicated a plan for you?
Well, I'll overcomplicate communication mainly. Like if point A is something that I need and point B is having communicated that need to someone else, I will add subpoint A1, A2, A3, A4, A5, A6, A7, all the way to maybe 26 or 27
Yeah.
before I get to actually talking to that person. And often, it's one of those things where if I need to have an official conversation, I'll have it 8 times in the shower of rehearsing how the whole conversation's going to go 5 or 6 different ways. And then it'll be as simple as I show up. I'm like, hey, so I just was thinking about this. Okay, great. Okay. And so I definitely overthink and over brainstorm a lot of that for myself personally.
The nice thing about that, Ashton, even though you spent that 8 times thinking through the conversation, you really knew what you wanted to solve, right? So even though you brainstormed a lot and you complicated the brainstorm, you got really clear on what your solution that you were driving for was at. Mom shared a funny story about you getting today at lunch and your simulation you did at MTech and your final report.
Oh my gosh, that was stupid. Well, not really. It was fine. So we had a 12-day simulation, and then at the end of it, we had to share a presentation on what we did through each round and change so that we maximized our efforts or whatever and share it with the whole class. So it showed up Monday, so yesterday, planning to make my presentation and present it. So I made it maybe an hour and a half. I made it. Brighton made his, my buddy who sits next to me. And we were ready to go. And Brighton was like, okay, I'm going to present next. Alex was like, no, you're not. Alex is our professor or teacher, whatever he wants to. He's like, no, you're not. He got on a phone call and was on it for 40 minutes. And then when he finally finished, he's like, okay, Brighton, so you got 200 on the simulation, right? Which is full points. And you had to get a certain amount of money. He's like, yeah, I did. He's like, so how about you get 50 out of 50 on the presentation? Because you know what you were doing. He's like, sure. So Brian didn't have to present. And then he went, hey, Gideon, you got full points on it, didn't you as well? I was like, yeah. So I got full points on the presentation. I didn't even have to present. I could have gone home 2 hours earlier. But, it's fine.
And what I told your mom, and here's where I thought the genius of Alex's plan is that you guys prepared. You guys did all the work necessary to present You had figured out your solution. You'd done all the brainstorming. You had your answers, and you're ready for any question he asked. So you already did the learning.
Yeah, he also just didn't want to watch the presentations.
I can't argue that. But my point is, though, sometimes you're going to have these thoughts and these conversations like Ashton was talking about in your head and wherever you want to go. You've designed this whole thing. You've come up with the best answer possible. And instead of you having to justify and explain to it, the boss goes, launch it.
Right.
He goes, good job. Because I know you thought about it. You use your critical thinking to get full points in the other part of the simulation. He knew that you had prepped your other part of your work. Had you looked nervous or scared, he would have been like, yeah, you're going to present anyways. Just because you weren't ready. You weren't in that mindset. So this is where I like to keep noodling, even after I've kind of made this brainstorming solution and I've got kind of a clearer idea like Steve Jobs talks about. I get to where I almost want to be. If I haven't made that decision or if I haven't shared that thought, I'll keep noodling it. I'll be like, I think this is the best solution. But I'll keep thinking about it until I'm actually time crunched, with that. Like, I guess I didn't realize that Albert Einstein had said that he'd spend that hour or 55 minutes thinking about the problem, then 5 minutes really drilling in my solution, because I spend a lot of time noodling it. That way, when I actually share the solution, it's pretty well thought out. And not everything's capable of that, right? Brakes on a freeway. Boom, you're thinking quick, you're moving on. But some stuff, as you have time to develop more content, but you've got to be thinking about it.
Well, I think the other thing that is important of that point there is he's talking about how he's reviewing the problem over and over and over again and then uses that information to determine the solution. I think sometimes, like, he was probably doing a math equation, right?
Oh,
so
sure.
It's like there's only one right answer in theory. But when it comes to life problems, I think not overanalyzing, but analyzing the problem for a while is good, because sometimes we'll come to a solution and we'll force the puzzle pieces to fit for that solution versus taking these steps to look at what the actual problem is first. So, like, we're so ready to find a solution that we don't spend enough time thinking of, options and possibilities.
I think that's really strong too on some of these life decisions, right? Because once you act your way in a box, it's hard to get out of.
Right.
You're like, oh, it's just buying a new car. It's 5:00 on a Friday afternoon. I'm going to drive down and buy a new car. Not thinking of how much am I going to have to finance? What am I going to have to pay? If you've already made these problems and these solutions before you show up, you've already got a very solid decision. You're like, this is exactly what I want. This is exactly what I want to do with it. This is exactly what I need. This works. I'm not advocating procrastination, because that's where this could turn if you're not careful. So I'd like everybody to realize that very few doors are one-way doors. Mm-hmm. And I think I've shared that before on the podcast, but that was my biggest learning at Amazon. There's things that drove me crazy at Amazon. I was pretty frustrated about. But one Jeff Bezos teaching that I really bought into and makes a lot of sense to me is most doors are not just one-way doors. Do you understand what I mean by that?
Yeah.
I think of right now Frontier Airlines emergency exits, where the door pops off and you go out. That's a one-way door.
Classic.
You're not getting back in that door, right?
No.
Once you're out, you're gone. And there are some of those in life, right? Quitting, and that's okay at certain jobs, right? That's why on those things you have to weigh a little bit harder. Relationships, those things that have bigger impacts. Yeah, spend a little bit more time on it. What candy bar to buy or not buy maybe doesn't have as long-term a consequence. They can go both ways. You can walk out in the street, you can start walking home, realize you don't want the candy bar, throw it away, give it away, whatever. There's multiple options there. Now the money's gone, you could sell it, recoup some of it. So very few are one-way doors. And then after you've identified that best option, right, that's step number 5. Once you've identified that best option, now it's go time. You launch that, you move forward with confidence. And I think that's where a lot of people get stuck, is that they move forward still tentatively. Like, okay, I think this is the best solution. I've thought about it. It's go time, but I only want to dip my toe in a little bit.
Right.
And I think along with that, like you said, that very few decisions are one-way doors. So if that decision, you're just half doing it, then how do you know really if it's the solution? You just can't be afraid of failure, because when you fail, obviously you learn, hopefully. And if you don't, then you failed again. So try and learn something.
But it gives you a chance to do some root cause analysis, right?
And then you have another problem to work off of with one solution that's checked off as not the solution. And you can just try again.
That's great, Gideon. I love it. Yeah, and I think your disc throwing is a great example of that right now. Going back to that track and field, you go out there and you get feedback. You're like, oh, I bounced that off the chain link fence. That was what was your exact words? Well, that sucked, I think, is what I can't remember exactly.
Yeah, in the meet, I was like, that sucked.
And your coach said, yeah, it surely did.
Yeah, it was awful.
And you're able to look at that and you're like, oh, I need to modify this and this. And then you start making those adjustments. And it's a little bit different because you've got your body and your form and some of that just stays. But other decisions, you get a pretty good feedback. So that was like on a career advice that I would give everybody. Make your decision. Know what you're going to go with because you've noodled the problem. You've thought hard about it. You've spent time on the problem. You've tried to understand it. You brainstormed all these great ideas. You identified the right one. You move forward with confidence, with passion, and then give yourself a time frame. If this solution doesn't work within X amount of time, and these are like, I'm jumping into new business. This is my desired outcome. If one of those variable changes in there, then I know it's time to change. I give myself a time frame for this to be successful by, or I give myself enough leeway. And you've got to be wise on that as well, right? Because sometimes people drop out too soon, but you've got to know what your measurements are to say, did my problem solve or did it just cause me a different problem? When Mom and I first got married, have I shared how many times we moved? Do you guys know how many times we moved in our first, I think it ended up being about 9 years of marriage.
I remember moving 4 different times.
Yeah,
personally.
You did as a kid, right? We moved 11 times in the first 10 years of our marriage.
That's a lot of times.
That's a lot of times. And I kept thinking a move is going to help me be a different person. This will give us a new outlook. This will be a new me. This will be a new, and then I had to start going, wait a second, I'm the same guy. Right. Then I have to start working on all those different components inside of who I really wanted to be. And I had to start changing my outlook. How many times have we moved now? Well, before you were born, right?
Yeah, I haven't moved at all.
Yeah. Gene, I think you were in a car seat. Do you remember painting the house with Mom?
I don't remember ever moving.
No, yeah, you were in a car seat, a baby carrier, as Mom painted the house. So that's,
you know better than I do.
Yeah. So since Gene's been born, we haven't moved, but I've still made a lot of changes in who I am and what I wanted. And Mom was very clear that she gave me a time frame. We're not going to move until Gideon graduates high school, or the youngest. She didn't know it was you at that time, but she's like, no, this is our home. We're here. And I can appreciate that because we made a decision. We had thought about the problem. We solved it. We came up with the best, and then we move forward in confidence. And then just work hard towards your solution. So I hope that these principles help you solve the problems that you've talked about or you've shared. And the more you practice root cause analysis, you get better at it. You become an expert at it. So, listener, I challenge you to figure out what that one problem is that you want to solve and start working on the different steps of identifying and understanding the problem. Research the problem, the systems and practices behind the problem. Visualize the problem, brainstorm multiple solutions, and then identify the most suitable solution, then go forward with confidence.
Thanks, Dad. I know that I have to work on that as well. And we would love to hear all of your guys' experiences with that. And we can hear those through our different social media channels by just looking up Adulting Decrypted, Instagram, Facebook. We have a subreddit, Facebook page, whatever you want to join us on. We'd love to hear your stories, and we can even share them on the podcast if you want us to. And we will definitely try as well. I know I will. But thank you for talking with us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Adulting Decrypted. We really enjoyed having this week's conversation, and we hope you did as well.
If you ever want to comment on a topic, you can send us a message to our website, adultingdecrypted.com,
our email, adultingdecrypted@gmail.com, or through our Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn accounts at Adulting Decrypted.
If you have any topics for the show that you would like us to talk about, or if you are a parent and want us to talk about something your kids should know, send us a message on any of the accounts mentioned. If you would like to be a guest or have an idea for someone you think we should have on our show, feel free to send us an email detailing your thoughts to adultingdecrypted@gmail.com. Adulting is teamwork.
We have merch. If you want to show off your Adulting Decrypted pride, check out our website, adultingdecrypted.com, or our partner website with shop.spreadshirt.com/adulting-decrypted.
Lastly, if you enjoyed the show, please consider supporting us on our Patreon at Adulting Decrypted. Along with the benefits that come with our Patreon, and trust us, there are some pretty good ones in there, you will not only be helping us continue in the effort to make great content, but you will be part of a community of individuals all trying their best to adult.
We appreciate you listening, enjoying, and leaving your positive reviews. Now, the special song from Gene and Gideon.